Hey, welcome to Art with Ian. Before we jump into the content today, I just want to say if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you enjoy the video, please do like and subscribe. It really helps me out. If you've been to the channel before, welcome back. We're starting a new series called Creating Worlds. And unlike some of my other series where I've done them just in, kind of a linear format where it's start from episode 1 and go on to episode 5 or 6 and do that kind of thing. This is going to be an ongoing series that I don't always add videos to every week. It's just whenever a topic comes up that fits into this series topic, it'll go into a playlist I'll be creating for the channel called Creating Worlds, and I'll just kind of build the series over time, and it'll kind of help to compartmentalize the videos that kind of work with this topic. Anyway, so as you can see here, I've just been establishing a bit of a background. So for this piece today, we're going to be doing a landscape, and I want to create, there's a very specific color palette and a mood that I want to create, like a very early morning or late evening kind of a feeling. Now, if you look over on the right where my palette is, or my color swatches, it says Dusk Landscape. And if you look at those colors that I've kind of laid out for myself, you'll notice they're all really grayed down, most of them, and they're all really similar values. And that's kind of a key point for this episode to talk about today, because we're going to be doing a grand scale kind of a scene. We're going to be pulled way back with the camera and looking out on this huge valley, and the only way to get that feeling of this great distance, this huge space, is by lowering the contrast and controlling our values and keeping, something that's green like the grass is going to be almost the same color really as something that's gray and rock or brown and rock. They're all the colors are extremely similar, very gray, very close, and what that accomplishes is this feeling of everything being washed out, and that low contrast tells you you're not close to the object. Your brain automatically reads that as being far away, and so now things that would normally, if that was painted in high contrast, it would just look really small. But because it's painted in low contrast, it looks like something really big, really far away. And as we get through, as the painting goes on a bit, you'll start to see what I'm talking about. Another feature of the piece today that I want to talk about is the simplicity of laying in a shadow. So an overall shadow color that you basically want, and then painting in where light is hitting. And for something like this, it's a really good way to work. You can see that I've got a very subtle gradation from kind of greener and darker into lighter and grayer. And that's just to just start to establish that there's that slight bit of distance in my shadow color, because everything I've got right now is basically my shadow. You've got the sun really far down, starting to set or rise. In my mind it's setting, but it's whatever. And now I'm just going to start to paint in where light is finding its way onto that landscape and striking protruding features. And it's really subtle. You just want to be really subtle when you do this kind of a thing. And at first it might feel a little overwhelming to try and get this kind of working, but it's actually a really quick way to lay in a piece like this rather than sketching it all out and trying to think of everything as lines. You just kind of think about the tops of planes. Think about where light might be hitting. Where's there grass? Where would grass actually grow on the landscape? If it's a severe angle of would there be grass? If you actually observe nature, usually grass will find its way to a certain point, and then it doesn't usually just grow off the side of a cliff face. So thinking about, okay, where can I bring my very grayed down green, and where do I want to switch from that green into the slightly more blue-gray or the slightly more tan gray. But again, remember that all of these colors are extremely close to each other that I'm using. There's not very much difference in the values at all. So I'm just in here, I'm just kind of establishing where the features are in my head. How much of this is going to be cliffside, how much of it is going to be, valley, and how much of it is going to be like, there's a sheer cliff and then more valley, right? You can see that oh, by the way, this has been sped up 3 times. So it's 3 times faster than I did it in real life, which is, any faster than that, and I thought it would be a little hard to follow it, like really follow what I'm doing. But this is basically, what you're seeing is pretty close to the speed that I was going. I mean, 3 times faster is not that much faster, really, in the grand scheme of things. It was, I tried to keep a pretty fluid motion, and that feeling of, the simplicity of what's going on. I'm all on one layer. If I want to push back some of my highlights, I just use Alt to color pick from the shadow and paint the shadow back in. And that's the workflow. You just paint light where light's hitting and then paint back in shadow. And establishing the features in that way. Thinking about the angle of light, right? The angle of light is so severe, so, it's coming down like this. And therefore, shadows are going to be quite long. And that means that there's a lot of shadow. There's a lot of shadow and not nearly as much lit up. So now you can see I'm establishing where there's like a cliff, right? You see the top plane and then a shadow, and then now you're seeing top plane come in again. Just bringing some color in a little bit into my shadow. I want cool shadows, right? So because I've got that, we're outside, we've got the sky, ambient light is cool, and then the light itself is quite warm, and that tends to be in that lighting setup when you're outside and you've got warm light and you've got cool sky, you tend to have quite a bit of cool color in your shadows. And I also want the color to just pick up as it gets towards us. So because while the closest bits are still quite far away, they're not nearly as far away as the farthest. And so now I have to keep in mind that I'm establishing distance within the distance. So close is far away, and then behind that, at the very back near the water, that's really far away. So I have to, manipulate the color and value even further. I find that personally starting with less saturation and slowly building into color is a much easier way to work than to get too much color down and then have to try and push everything back when you know that everything's pushed back like this. Oh, some technical spec stuff. I'm working at 300 ppi and on like a 20-inch wide by 11.5-inch tall canvas. And that ratio is basically like a standard 1080p ratio. If you were to size it down to pixels, you could find it would find its way down to 1920 by 1080, which is the 1080p ratio. And I like to work on that at that. Those specs work really well for landscapes. They're not quite 4K. I like 4K, but it just sometimes it feels just a little wide and not quite tall enough. I kind of wanted to feel like, since I knew I was going to be breaking this up into thirds, I didn't want it to feel too compressed. Like I wanted the viewer to feel the space a little bit. And speaking of breaking it up into thirds, that's a compositional thing, and most of you would probably know the rule of thirds. It's really quite standard thing. You learn it early on as an artist, or you should anyways. But if you're not aware, it's a really great rule to break your canvas into thirds going both directions. And in the areas where those third lines cross each other, you'll get those little crossing points from the horizontal vertical lines. Those are good spots to put your focal point. And you'll notice that where I put my sun is on basically where the third line of going up and down meets the third line going side to side. That's the focal point, and that's the area of brightest contrast. Eventually I will be putting a foreground element in towards the end, and I'll have a character standing kind of looking out over this place, as telling a bit more of the story, like, are they going to go infiltrate this place? Is it their homeland and they're looking over the place that they mean to protect, kind of a thing? And that character will be on the opposite focal point location. So what you see here, I just moved everything up a little bit. The reason I did that is because it was feeling a little bit compressed down at the bottom where I want to show that bottom valley. And also there was a little bit of a almost tangent happening on the far left cliffs to the water horizon. And tangents are, always look for them and always avoid them. Tangents are uncomfortable for the viewer. They might not know why, but they are. And they confuse the composition, and you always want your composition to be as clear and simple, easy to understand as possible for the viewer, or for it to make the most sense that it should be making, like that kind of a thing. So you can see here I'm still just in there doing the same stuff. I'm establishing terrain. I'm just creating terrain by saying what is getting some light on it and what's not getting light on it, and what is grass growing and what is rock. Those are the two ways in which I'm able to tell the viewer what they're seeing. Even though all of these value shifts are super subtle, if you were to put them, you can look again at the color swatches and see how close these colors are to each other. Except for the sunset colors at the top of the swatch. I don't know, it's a color swatch group. I think it's swatch group, yeah. Group of swatches, whatever. So now I'm establishing a foreground element. Well, it's not a foreground element, but I'm establishing a feature that clearly pushes back the middle and back areas. Oh, I'm saving. Hadn't done that yet. And what that does is it helps you to feel like this place has depth. Overlapping features really help with that. You can see I also put in a foreground element. Like, that's clearly that kind of lime green. That's clearly up near us now. That's much closer to us. And you can tell by the saturation of the color and the brightness that it is. It'll obviously get developed. I'm just going back in and adding a little bit of life to my grasses and just trying to give it some variation of color so that it feels like there's more going on, even though it's really far away and we can't see anything like real detail. There should be areas where, for example, if you look at a field, you'll typically see an area where there's a little bit of mud, or where the grass has died for some reason and it goes from green to a bit more brown. Those kinds of features, thinking about that kind of stuff. Now I'm just getting in. I went and took some light from the sky, and I'm just starting to establish a little bit more of this. There's like a big canyon running through the land right here, and I'm just starting to try and sell that to the viewer, that there's basically rock going down into where you can't see anymore. And then we've got the valley on this side, and there's something carving through the land. And I want that feeling to kind of carve through and look like it opens up and then goes around and then comes back around. So we're kind of, we're developing a feature. We're developing features into this landscape. And the best way to do this, or to know, or to get ideas for how to do this, is to just look at the world. Just look at photographs. Look up landscapes, or landscapes with canyons, or landscapes with rivers, or landscapes with mountains, and just study what the land does. And I'm a big geology person. I love geology, and I studied surface processes. I studied other areas of geology, and it really helped with my art a lot doing that, because I kind of understand the way certain things behave. And for example, how does sedimentary rock behave and or look versus igneous rock that has things have maybe weathered and eroded away, and we're left with some igneous rock, or maybe some deformation has happened and the igneous rock has pushed through. Typically we don't see igneous on the surface unless something has happened. It's not part of a natural process like sedimentary rock. So kind of understanding these kinds of things, and how a landscape can be formed over time with natural processes. Water has a big part to play, for sure. Always consider that. So now I'm in there kind of looking. I'm just starting to get into the point now where I'm into my secondary stuff. Like all of the initial stuff has been established, and I'm just starting to look for ways to kind of go that one step further and clean things up, clean ideas up, refine a little bit. And towards the end of this, like my final refining and detailing phase, I actually do off camera, because I got to the point where the composition was definitely done, and there was really not that much more that would be offered to you as a viewer as far as the process. It's just literally me just going in, zooming in on something, then cleaning it up, and that's just, I wouldn't put anyone through watching that. I do have videos, I think a few videos, where I do show my process all the way into detailing, but typically, that's not for the faint of heart by any means. But the most important thing is to understand how the composition is developed. Detail is detail, You look at, if you want to paint a rock, look at rocks. How do rocks work, But I don't go into that much detail, even still. That's not the purpose of this piece. Is not actually to create like a super high detail matte painting. I mean, it's kind of going in the direction of matte painting, but that's not its purpose, because what I'm doing here is I'm exploring a world concept, an environment concept, and I'm just pushing it enough to where I feel happy with the study, with the concept that I've come up with, the kind of place I want it to be. I don't need it to go. There's only so far into detail that you need something to go to know how it feels, and then after that, the detail it's not gonna make it feel more like the place it feels like, if that makes any sense. So then it just becomes a matter of, what are you going to do with the piece? Are you trying to show everybody how detailed your work is, or how detailed you can go, or is it about that, or is it about your own creative process? You just have to decide how much time you want to pour into something. For me, if I can get away with not going too high detail, I typically will. Unless I'm unhappy with the work, I usually walk away as soon as my brain will let me walk away, because I'd much rather be creating my next piece than spending 5 hours noodling details on rocks. So, everyone has their own way about them, you know. So now I'm working in a platform for our character so that the piece has a subject, and to show that this place is inhabited, and also to give just a little bit of human scale, which always goes a long way for telling the viewer how big everything else is. In this case, I've done that a bit with the waterfalls. And other features I think are also doing that, but I certainly feel like the waterfalls help to tie it down as like, okay, we all can tell that's a waterfall there, and that's probably quite large, and it looks really small. So what does that tell us? That means that this place is huge. Huge valley. So I'm starting to push the saturation in the sunset so that some of the, as we get brighter and more saturated back there, the landscape will become more and more subtle. It'll feel more and more like the reason we don't see as much detail is because of that light getting in the way, the distance and the light also pushing it into silhouette. Starting to detail out my foreground element, putting a couple rocks in there. I think in a second here I'll paint a tree in too, which is another little bit of an indication of human scale. Like, that land feature there is obviously closer, but not that close because there's a tree and it's, you could reach out and grab it. So it's still pretty far away, but nowhere near as far away as the stuff down below. And this process is, you can see that I'm getting richer with my colors now. And that understanding, like, as you come towards the camera, you have to start to give the viewer the more color and more contrast and more variation so that they have the cue. They need a visual cue. Otherwise, if you push that as, you keep the values all low and you push it, it's going to look like a gigantic tree that's really far away. So you have to control your values. That's probably one of the most important things to take away from this video. Like, one of the takeaways is control your values. Control your values. Don't let your values get away from you. Always know why you're choosing a value you're choosing. And I think we all know that we need to control our color. If we let color get away from us, things look awful. But I think that people are a little less switched on to the need to control their values and how that impacts the viewer and what they take away from what they're seeing. Okay, so now it looks like I'm painting in my guy here. And I started with just a indication of how tall I wanted him to be. And the main point of that is to make sure that his head breaks the plane of the background. Remember that tangent thing I was talking about? If it would have ended up at the same height as that back cliff, it would have looked terrible. And if it didn't break that plane, it wouldn't have sold the overlap nearly as well. So that was like first order of, basically this character the first thing it needs to do is break that line and overlap properly. The next thing is to actually start to flesh out the pose. And I did not go, this piece isn't about the character. The character is obviously an important part of it, but the piece isn't about the character. So I didn't go crazy. I didn't do any elaborate pose. And I didn't go overly crazy in general with anything about him. He's just there looking out over this place, and the place is the real point of the painting. So once I get him to silhouette, then I think we're going to switch over and I'll bring up the finished piece where you'll see that I've done a little bit more work, added trees down in the valley, pushed the detail that little bit, made things a little richer, especially in the sunset. And that'll be coming up here really quickly. Just kind of trying to make sure I get the silhouette to feel good enough. Okay, and here we are at the finished piece. So you can see I put a little bit of color in his costume, did some rim light, some birds. You can see I added some trees down in the valley, but for all intents and purposes, nothing really major has changed in the piece. It's all pretty much what you saw me paint. Just went through and refined it that little bit. And so that's the piece. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're looking forward to more episodes in this series. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications of future videos. That really helps me out. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought of it, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.